Captain's Log, Stardate 3234.7. Helmsman Sulu and Ensign Chekhov absconded with an Enterprise shuttle with Commander Spock and Nurse Chapel incapacitated in the rear. Both were tied at the wrists and ankles and bound to their respective seats and were alert but unable to release themselves from their bindings. The shuttlecraft was on final approach when Sulu contacted the Altiers Tower in an attempt to land. Altiers, this is Commander Sulu. Do you read? Sulu asked. He gave himself a promotion, not earned or deserved. Reread, Commander Sulu. May we ask what you are doing? We request permission to land, Sulu stated as fact. There was a brief pause before the tower replied. Request denied, the controller replied. Return to your ship or find another landing port. Sulu looked to Chekhov and shook his head. What do you think? Sulu asked his co-pilot. We don't require permission. This thing almost lands itself, Chekhov replied. Yes, I know, but we don't want to hit any traffic on the way down, Sulu stated. The shuttle has a collision warning system. We'll be fine, Chekhov stated, waving off the warning like a fly buzzing around his head. Spock spoke up and said, the collision warning is just that, a warning. The system won't stop you from colliding with another shuttle or another spacecraft. If I wanted your advice, Vulcan, I'd ask for it, Sulu said, as rudely as he could. I don't want to die, Nurse Chapel said, squirming in her seat. Don't worry, your pretty little head, Sulu replied with a grin. He turned back to see Chapel trying to pull her binders off. Don't waste your time. Those are not coming off anytime soon. Sulu pressed the comm button and said to the space traffic controller, We're running out of fuel and we need to land immediately. Our scan says you have enough fuel for 8 hours, the controller replied. We advise you turn around or seek another landing port. You are not allowed to land at Altiers. That didn't work, Chekhov said, frustrated. Just pick a spot and land. What are they going to do? It was then the shuttlecraft jolted and changed course. What in the hell was that? Chekhov asked, holding on for dear life. Spock replied, They have you in a tractor beam. Sulu pressed the buttons on his console in an attempt to regain control of the shuttlecraft. Nothing he did changed his directions or gave him back control. Do something, Chekhov yelled. I'm trying, Sulu replied. Think of something. You know as much about this piece of crap as I do. Spock again spoke up. Do as the controller stated and turn back to the Enterprise. You have no chance to land at Altiers, and your best chance to stay out of Starfleet prison is to return the shuttlecraft and your passengers. By now, Chapel was able to free her arms from her body and wrap her wrist bindings around Sulu's neck, pulling him back and restricting his windpipe. Sulu grasped at the bindings and pulled with all of his strength to free himself from the death grip. Chekhov leaned over to assist Sulu, but was stopped when Spock used the Vulcan nerve pinch to incapacitate him. Sulu used all of his remaining strength to lean forward and press the command release button, disengaging the autopilot function. He passed out and slumped over onto Chekhov, who was unconscious. Immediately, the tractor beam released, and the shuttlecraft pitched down, lifting both Spock and Chapel out of their seats. What's going on? Chapel screamed. The tractor beam automatically releases when the autopilot is disengaged. It's a safety feature built into the system, Spock replied. We're heading for the ground, Chapel yelled. Spock's legs were still bound, so it was difficult for him to lean forward and reach the control panel. Sulu and Chekhov blocking him didn't help. Lean forward and bring up the command panel, Spock said, as calmly as he could. Command what? Chapel asked. I'm a nurse, not a shuttlecraft pilot. The gray button at the top of the display, on the far left. Press it now, Spock yelled. Chapel reached out but couldn't get to the button. She tried rocking back and forth until she grazed the button enough for the display to appear. I got it now. Now what? She asked. Do you see the prompt for altitude? Spock asked, trying to speak calmly. Chapel scanned the prompt but couldn't find anything that said altitude. No, I can't find it, Chapel replied, almost screaming. Spock could see the ground approaching quickly through the main windshield. He knew he had only seconds to override the system. Push anything, any button you can reach. Chapel rocked forward and pressed the only buttons within her reach. Without warning, the shuttlecraft banked to the right and began a flat spin out of control. "We're not going to make it," Chapel yelled as she was pressed back into her seat. Within moments, the shuttlecraft impacted the ground and exploded into a ball of flames. All 4 members of the crew were instantly killed. The controller called for an emergency, and all flights were halted as the fire crews drove onto the runways to extinguish the fire. Captain's Log 2345.5. The survivors of a shuttlecraft crash on the planet Yondo Tetero gather around a fire, finishing off the body of Ensign Pavel Chekhov, as his flesh roasts over the red-hot glowing coals in the dim light of dusk. For 3 weeks, Kirk, Spock, Scott, and McCoy have staved off starvation, picking off 1 crew member at a time. But now, time is running out. Water is available in the replicator, but the carbon stores were damaged in the accident, rendering food replication impossible. Chekhov was the 4th crew member served up and the last non-commissioned officer aboard. Without refrigeration, Chekhov's body will last 1 more day. "Now what?" McCoy asked. "I'll take off before any of you tries to eat me." "The distress call reached Starbase 3 weeks ago. We should be rescued any day," Kirk replied. "At Warp 10, it would take Starfleet 2 days to reach us, 5 at the most." "What do you think they're going to do with us when they find out we ate 4 of our crew?" McCoy asked. "Give us all medals and a ticker-tape parade for surviving on this crap-hole planet," Kirk replied. "Nobody will care." "I'm sure Chekhov's family will care," McCoy said, looking up at the body rotating on the spit. McCoy jabbed at the carcass with a stick and tore off a piece of Chekhov and ate it. He followed with a gulp of water. "There's nothing you can do now," Scott said, "and for one, I'd rather be alive than dead." "What are you going to say when they ask how we decided who lived and who was lunch?" McCoy asked. "We didn't exactly ask for volunteers." "They don't know that, and you don't have to tell them," Kirk replied. "We say they were injured in the crash and didn't recover. That might work for you, me, and Scott, but not Spock. The Vulcans don't lie, and he won't go with the story. Right, Spock?" McCoy asked. "Vulcans are compelled to tell the truth," Spock said, "but under extenuating circumstances, we have been known to bend the truth," Spock said. "Is this one of those extenuating circumstances?" McCoy asked. "I would say so," Spock replied. "I would hope so. You seemed to enjoy Chekhov more than we did," McCoy replied. Scott spoke up. "What if Starfleet takes longer than 2 days?" Kirk shook his head and looked up at Scott. "I guess we draw straws. Or someone volunteers," Kirk replied. "That's more than we offered our crew." "Volunteer my ass," Scott yelled. "You won't get me on that," he added as he reached for his phaser. They all had one. "Then I guess we all starve and die," Kirk said with a smile. "What else can we do?" "What else can we do?" Scott replied. "I, for one, am not going to worry about getting off this rock. I know Starfleet will pick us up and save us. Probably before you know it," Kirk said, poking the fire with a stick. The smoke drifted in the air and blew with the wind. "We should do something with the remains," Spock said. "Tradition says we should respect the dead." "They'll just dig them up anyway and give the bodies to the families. Waste of time and energy. We need to conserve our energy. Technically, we can live 30 days without eating," McCoy said. "Are you serious?" Scott asked. "We didn't have to kill anyone? Why didn't you say something earlier?" "I'm not in charge," McCoy stated. "You're the medical officer. You should have said something. We didn't have to kill 4 crew members, you sick bastard," Scott said. "And Spock, you knew as well. You're the science officer." "It is true we could survive 30 days without food, but it is best that we eat if food is available. Without proper nutrition, we would become weak, our mental capacity would fluctuate, and our chance for overall survival would diminish," Spock replied. "We made the best choice for our situation and for our survival." "Do you hear what you're saying?" Scott asked. "We murdered 4 people." "I don't think murder is the best choice of words," Spock replied. Reallocation of resources would be more accurate. They don't hang people for reallocation of resources. They hang them for murder, Scott said, shaking his head. 6 of one, half a dozen of another, Kirk said smugly. Nobody's going to charge us for anything. Don't get your panties in a bunch, engineer. Scott stood up and drew his phaser. I'm not going down for something that was out of my control. I would never have killed or eaten any of our crew if I knew I could survive for 30 days. Sit down and shut up, Kirk said, unless you want to be next. Oh, don't worry. I won't be next, Scott said. He shot his phaser at Chekhov, knocking his body onto the coals, kicking up black smoke. I'm the one holding all the cards. McCoy pulled his phaser and shot Scott in the leg, knocking him over. Kirk reached over and pulled Scott's phaser from his hand. I told you to sit down, Kirk said smugly. Just then, a signal came over the shuttle speaker. It was Starfleet Command pinging an incoming message. See, Kirk said, all of our problems are solved. We'll be off this rock in no time. What about Scott? Spock asked. Kirk shot Scott in the head so he wouldn't talk, and soon the crew was rescued. Captain's Log 2424.5. The Starship Enterprise continues to orbit the third moon of the gas giant planet Scorpio Majoris, awaiting the return of the crew on shore leave. Chief Engineer Scott volunteered to run the transporter panel, anticipating a special package to be delivered by his good friend Sulu. The item Sulu is carrying is a bottle of home-crafted whiskey, purchased at the city market, paid for by Scotty, and not created in a replicator. Scott slowly slid the control slider up the transport panel, listening to the unique sound of the transfer, watching the crew appear out of thin air. The magic of the transporter had become routine over time, and Scott is no longer fascinated by the technology behind the process of scattering, transferring, and reorganizing atoms. Scott expected Sulu to appear up front on the right transporter pad, but once the crew of 5 materialized, Sulu is notably absent. A quick count showed the rest of the crew is present and accounted for, but no Sulu. Where's Sulu? Scott asked the crew. Chief of Security Dickerson stepped down off the pad and replied, He was standing right next to me. Scott brought up the transport information on his screen and saw a red script blinking in unison, catching his attention. The script read, File corrupted. What does that mean? Dickerson asked, pointing to the screen. Slowly, Scott replied, I have no idea. I've never seen anything like this before, and began to panic. Get me a tech crew down here, Scott snapped. Quickly! McCoy, Kirk, and Scott joined the 2 tech crew staff as they surrounded this display. Where's Sulu? McCoy asked, concerned. Is he trapped in this infernal machine? One of the tech crew replied, We have an incomplete file transfer. What does that mean? Incomplete. He's not trapped in transit or stored in the hard drive. He is encoded, but his file is scrambled, the tech replied. I don't understand, McCoy said sternly. What do you mean scrambled? Can you fix it? We can attempt to put the file back in order, but some of the information is missing. Even if we were able to sort out the information, we couldn't recreate the whole file. I don't believe you. There must be a way, McCoy barked. Spock replied, Doctor, Sulu is gone. Kirk asked, How could this happen? We've used the transporter for years. I've never heard of a file being corrupted before. There must be a safeguard for this. A tech replied, The chances of this kind of file error is 1 in a million, but possible. I don't recall an error being reported. You have to do something, McCoy snapped, waving his hand around in distress. We will do our best, the tech replied, but I can't make any guarantees. Spock, figure this out, McCoy yelled. You're the computer expert. I will do what I can, Dr. McCoy, but transporter technology is not my field of expertise, Spock replied. There must be someone or something that we can find to help. Kirk replied, Calm down, Bones. Give them a chance to do their jobs. Despondent, Scott leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes and mumbled, I killed Sulu. This wasn't your fault, Scotty, Kirk reassured. Don't blame yourself. Just then, a tech noticed something odd on the screen and tapped a few keys. This doesn't make sense, the tech said, rubbing his chin. This field should have been left empty. Scott opened his eyes and leaned over to read the screen. No, it asks if any additional material will be transported back. Sulu had a bottle of whiskey, and I inputted the weight. The computer automatically calculates weight, the tech replied. That field was for mass, which is density times volume. The computer didn't know what to do with the extra input and corrupted the file. Scott felt weak, slid down the wall, leaning his head back in a daze and denial. I killed Sulu with a typo? Scott asked. Why didn't the computer flag the mistake before I energized the transfer? From the transporter pad, an unfamiliar voice called out, Your friend Sulu is not lost or gone, and your error is not why he's trapped in transport. Everyone turned to face the alien, who stepped down to the floor and raised an arm in a friendly gesture to greet the Enterprise crew. Scotty stood up and stepped to the front, feeling the weight of the world lift off of his chest. Where is Sulu? Scotty asked. Aren't you curious who I am? The alien asked. In time. Where is my friend? What did you do with him? Spock asked. Why do we read a corrupt file if Sulu is intact? I needed a place to hold him until I cleared up the matter before us, the alien replied. I can correct the file with a thought after our discussion. Curious, Kirk asked. What is this matter you speak of? Why do you hold Sulu hostage? Hostage isn't the right word. Your friend is a thief, and I am here to take him into custody, the alien explained. Thief? What are you accusing him of stealing? Kirk asked. A very valuable bottle of Arcanian whiskey, the alien replied. He absconded with the merchandise like he owned it. Sulu is no thief, Scott yelled. I gave him more than enough to cover the cost. I don't know what he did with the money you gave him, but he didn't spend it on whiskey, the alien said. Fine, I'll pay again, Scott said, pulling out his wallet. Bring Sulu back. That's not how this works, the alien replied. That's not how any of this works. The crime has been committed, and your friend will have his day in court. I have come to claim his entity and take him back with me to stand trial for theft. I won't allow you to take him, Kirk said flatly. He will stay trapped in your computer indefinitely, the alien replied, until you release him to me. Who are you? McCoy asked. Alien law enforcement? You are as much of an alien to me as I am to you. No, I am the owner of the establishment your friend stole from. We don't want law enforcement involved. Trust me, the alien said. And you think we're going to hand Sulu over to you? McCoy asked. You're crazy. We'll pay you for that bottle of whiskey, and you can return Sulu back into a physical being. I will receive restitution, my bottle returned, and your friend will be punished, the alien replied. You don't get to dictate to me how this turns out. Only I can transform him back into his previous form, so unless you want him to remain a computer file, I suggest you all step aside and let me do what I came to do. Just then, the sound of the transporter filled the room, and Sulu formed on the pad, holding the bottle of whiskey in his arms, unharmed and unaware of what happened. What's going on? Sulu asked, confused. Scotty walked over to the transporter pad and held out his arms. It's about time you arrived. I've been waiting for my whiskey all day long. And here we go again. This is Mr. Scott. He is the star of the show. If you can, pass this story, this file, this story on to your friends. I'd like to build up some more followers, and if you're into Star Trek the original series, I have like 14 of these now in a playlist that you can just go ding, 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 ding. Oh, here we go. Ding, 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 ding with your file there, and just get onto my mailing list or onto my subscriber list. And I do appreciate it, and thank you for showing up.